Have you ever felt a strange darkness inside you, something you couldn't quite explain, but you knew was there? Maybe it's a sudden burst of rage, a thought you wish you never had, or a part of yourself you keep buried deep down, hoping no one, especially not you, ever sees it. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, called this hidden part of ourselves the shadow self. But what if I told you that this shadow, this so-called darkness, isn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced? That behind the shame, the fear, the guilt, lies untapped power, true freedom, and maybe, just maybe, the real you. In this video, we're going to dive deep, very deep, into Carl Jung's shadow self theory. This is not a surface-level motivational video. This is a journey into your unconscious, a map of the human soul, a guide for facing the parts of yourself that society taught you to ignore, suppress, or deny. But here's the twist. This isn't just a lecture. This is an experience. To help you understand and apply this life-changing theory, we've broken the video into easy-to-follow chapters, each peeling back another layer of the psyche. So whether you're here out of curiosity, pain, or the search for something deeper, you'll leave with a clearer understanding of yourself and the hidden forces that shape your behavior, your relationships, and your life. And if you've ever felt like there's something inside you, waiting to be understood, waiting to be seen, this is the video you've been waiting for. Now, before we open the door to your shadow, let me offer you a light to carry on this journey. Subscribe to our channel, not just to stay updated, but to stay connected to your own inner transformation. Think of the subscribe button as your first brave step into the unknown, and that bell icon, it's not just for notifications. It's your personal reminder that every shadow has a story, and every story deserves to be told. Are you ready to face your shadow? Let's begin. Chapter 1. What is the shadow? We all wear masks at school, at work, even in front of the people we love. But have you ever wondered, what lies behind that mask? Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of ourselves we pretend doesn't exist. Not because it's evil, not because it's broken, but because it's unacceptable. At least, according to the world we live in. The shadow isn't some villain hiding in the dark. It's your hidden self-rejected emotions, suppressed desires, impulses, instincts, dreams, and fears that you've pushed down. Maybe since childhood. Have you ever smiled when you wanted to scream? Stayed quiet when your truth begged to speak? Acted like everything was okay, when it absolutely wasn't? That's where your shadow begins. Everyone carries a shadow, Jung said, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. In other words, the more we try to ignore it, the more it controls us. Think about it like this. You're standing in front of a bright spotlight. Behind you, on the wall, a dark silhouette follows your every move. You can't touch it. You can't escape it. You barely notice it, unless you look back. The shadow isn't just one thing. It's not just anger or jealousy. It's anything that you, your family, your culture, your religion taught you was wrong. For some, that might be ambition. For others, sensitivity, creativity, sexuality, even joy. Yes, even joy can be shadow material. If you were raised in a home where happiness was treated as a luxury, or where success was punished instead of celebrated, that's what makes the shadow so complex. It's not just your dark side, it's your unlived life, all the things you could be, all the things you are, but weren't allowed to express. So why do we hide these parts? Because when we were young, we learned that certain behaviors made people uncomfortable. Crying too much, speaking too loudly, wanting too much attention, being too much. So we split. A part of us became the persona, the face we show the world, and the other part, the messy, raw, untamed part, got pushed into the dark. But just because we ignore it doesn't mean it disappears. The shadow waits. It waits in your reactions, your triggers, your dreams, your addictions, your self-sabotage. It shows up when you lash out and don't know why, when you fall in love with someone who's bad for you again, when you find yourself repeating the same toxic patterns and swearing, this time it'll be different. It waits until you're ready to see it. But here's the paradox. What we fear the most in ourselves often holds the key to our greatest power, because the shadow isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to wake you up. In the next chapter, we'll explore exactly how the shadow is formed from childhood memories to cultural conditioning, and why we bury parts of ourselves just to be accepted. But remember, the deeper we go, the more light we find. Chapter 2. How the shadow is formed. To truly understand the shadow, we need to take a quiet walk back into our earliest memories, not the ones that made us laugh, but the ones that made us hide. You weren't born ashamed. You didn't enter this world questioning your emotions or silencing your truth. In fact, you came into the world whole. You cried when you were sad. You screamed when you were angry. You laughed when you were happy. You were completely and unapologetically yourself. But slowly, the world taught you something different. It taught you which parts of yourself were acceptable and which ones needed to be buried. From a very young age, we start to absorb silent rules, spoken or unspoken, about how to behave. If you were praised for being quiet and scolded for being loud, you learned to silence yourself. If you were hugged for being helpful, but ignored when you needed help, you learned to suppress your needs. These early adaptations aren't random. They're survival strategies. As children, we aren't just looking for love, we're looking for safety. And when being our true selves threatens that safety, we begin to split ourselves in two. One version becomes the persona, the face we wear in public, the agreeable one, the successful one, the calm, good one. The other version, that gets pushed into the darkness, that version becomes the shadow, the collection of thoughts, feelings, and instincts that we weren't allowed to express. But here's the truth. Just because we push something down doesn't mean it disappears. It simply finds a new home in the unconscious, where it grows, waits, and eventually finds other ways to surface. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He explained that the shadow isn't evil by nature. It simply contains what was once part of you, but was rejected. Anger, sadness, jealousy, passion, sensitivity, ambition, even joy. Yes, sometimes, even our joy ends up in the shadow if we grew up in homes where happiness was frowned upon or punished. The shadow is shaped not only by family, but by culture, religion, school, and society. What's seen as too much in one home might be celebrated in another. This is why your shadow is unique to you. It carries the pieces of yourself that you had to let go of to fit in. Let's take a simple example. Suppose as a child you were told not to cry. You were teased or punished for being too emotional. Over time, you learned to swallow your tears, to smile even when you were hurting. Fast forward 10 years and, now, you find yourself emotionally disconnected, unable to be vulnerable with the people you love. That sadness never vanished, just went underground. It lives in your shadow now, showing up in your inability to connect, or in the tightness in your chest when someone tries to get close. Or maybe you were always told to be nice, to never get angry, never say no, never ask for too much. So you became the peacemaker, the helper, the one who never complains. But the anger you buried didn't disappear. Now, it erupts in passive aggression, resentment, or sudden outbursts. You don't understand. You might even ask yourself, why did I say that? Or where did that come from? The answer, your shadow. It holds every part of you that you've locked away, and it doesn't stay quiet forever. The danger isn't in having a shadow. The danger is in pretending it's not there. Because when we disown parts of ourselves, we give them more power. They influence our choices without us realizing it. They shape our relationships. They fuel our addictions, our judgments, our projections. They lead us to sabotage our own growth. And yet, we continue pretending. I'm fine. That's not me. I'm not like that. But the more we run from the shadow, the more control it has. What's tragic and beautiful is that we didn't split ourselves out of malice. We did it to survive. As children, we made the only trade we knew, authenticity for belonging. And now, as adults, we walk around with a carefully curated identity, while the rest of us lives in exile, behind closed emotional doors. But Jung didn't leave us in despair. He believed the journey of life is not to be perfect, but to become whole again, to remember, to reintegrate, to reclaim, because the shadow doesn't hold just your pain, it holds your power. The parts of you that were too bold, too creative, too wild, too real for the people around you, are still alive, and they're waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to turn around and say, I see you, I'm ready. That's the beginning of shadow work. Not judgment, not shame, but recognition, compassion, the courage to face what was once rejected and bring it back into the light. In the next chapter, we'll explore the mask we wear to hide the shadow our persona. You'll begin to see how much of your identity is actually a performance, and how that performance often keeps the real you locked in the shadows. Chapter 3: Shadow and the Persona. To fully grasp Carl Jung's shadow theory, we must now examine the opposite of the shadow, the mask we wear to conceal it. Jung called this mask the persona. It's the version of ourselves we show to the world, shaped by expectation, approval, and adaptation. If the shadow is what we've repressed, the persona is what we've chosen to project. The word persona originally comes from Latin, meaning mask. In ancient theater, actors wore masks to portray different characters. Similarly, we wear psychological masks in our everyday lives. You may have a different persona at work, another with your family, and yet another with strangers. These personas aren't always lies, they're adaptations. They allow us to function, to be accepted, to fit into the social fabric of life. But problems begin when we start to confuse the mask with the truth. Think of a child who grows up in a household where being quiet is rewarded and being expressive is punished. That child learns quickly, if I want to be loved, I need to stay small, stay quiet, stay agreeable. So a persona is born. Maybe it's the good girl, the golden boy, the quiet one, and with every compliment and pat on the back, that persona becomes more solid, more believable. But beneath it, something else grows, unacknowledged, unseen. The rage, the rebellion, the fire, that becomes the shadow. As the persona becomes stronger, the shadow becomes more distant. But they are never separate. They are two sides of the same coin bound together in a psychological dance. The more polished and perfect your persona becomes, the more raw and intense your shadow becomes. And when we become over-identified with the persona, we begin to feel empty. We live a life that looks good from the outside, but feels hollow inside. We laugh on cue, but the joy isn't real. We succeed at things we don't even care about. We become strangers to ourselves. Jung warned that an overdeveloped persona is a danger to the soul. Why? Because it leads to fragmentation. You begin to perform instead of live. You become what others want to see, rather than who you truly are. You lose the ability to connect deeply with others and with yourself. Behind every perfectionist, people pleaser, or control freak is often a shadow crying out to be seen. A child who had to perform to be loved. But here's the deeper truth. The persona is not the enemy. It was created for a reason. It protected you. It helped you survive. It gave you a place in the world when being yourself felt unsafe. The danger isn't the persona itself. It's forgetting that it's only a part of you, not the whole of you. Jung believed the path to wholeness involves recognizing the mask, and then removing it, gently, one layer at a time. This requires honesty. It means asking hard questions. Am I being authentic, or am I performing? Is this what I want, or what I've been told to want? Who am I when no one is watching? These questions lead us not just to the shadow but to our truth. Something profound happens when we begin to balance the persona and the shadow. We stop being afraid of contradiction. We allow ourselves to be both strong and vulnerable, kind and assertive, joyful and angry. We become paradoxical, just like real humans are. And in that acceptance, healing begins. You may have been praised for being nice, but your wholeness includes your boundaries. You may be seen as calm, but your fire is sacred too. You may wear the mask of confidence, but your insecurities are not shameful. They are deeply human. Integration starts when we stop choosing sides, when we stop pretending that our persona is the full story, when we allow space for what has long been exiled to return home. In the next chapter, we'll take a leap from the personal into the collective. You'll discover that the shadow doesn't just exist inside you, it lives in all of us. In the hidden fears of society, in collective trauma, in the myths we inherit. Chapter 4, The Collective Unconscious. As we dive deeper into Carl Jung's shadow theory, we move from the personal into the universal. Up to this point, we've been talking about your individual shadow, how it's formed, hidden, and revealed. But Jung didn't believe the human mind existed in isolation. In fact, he proposed that beneath our personal unconscious lies a far deeper layer, a psychological ocean that we all share. He called it the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is the inherited memory of the entire human race. It contains the emotional and symbolic blueprint of every human being who has ever lived. Think of it as an ancient library, not with books, but with images, instincts, and patterns of thought. These are not memories you consciously experienced, but ones you were born with. Just as your body inherited DNA from your ancestors, your psyche has inherited psychological structures, what Jung called archetypes. Archetypes are the ancient characters that appear across all cultures and myths: the hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man, the rebel. These figures appear in stories from every corner of the globe, not because cultures copied each other, but because we all carry these symbolic roles in our unconscious minds. They are universal expressions of the human experience. We recognize them in books, in films, in dreams, and even in ourselves. Now, what does this have to do with the shadow? Everything, because each archetype has both light and dark sides. The hero can be brave, but also arrogant. The mother can be nurturing, but also smothering. The trickster can be clever, but also manipulative. The shadow exists within each of these archetypes, and, because they live in the collective unconscious, their shadows can influence us without our even knowing it. You might find yourself drawn to certain characters in movies or myths who resonate deeply or disturb you intensely. Jung believed that such reactions reveal projections from the collective unconscious. When you're intensely inspired or triggered by a fictional figure, it may be that a hidden archetype, something your conscious mind has forgotten, but your deeper psyche remembers, is stirring within you. Take society itself. Every culture has its own collective shadow, the things it refuses to see, the parts of history it buries, the behaviors it publicly condemns, but privately indulges. These collective shadows are inherited through media, religion, politics, and education. For example, a society that prides itself on progress may hide its cruelty to the poor. A culture that promotes purity may secretly suppress its sexuality. Just as individuals wear masks, so do entire civilizations. We carry these collective shadows, even if we didn't directly participate in them. They shape our unconscious biases, our inherited fears, and our collective traumas. This is why shadow work is not just personal, it's also social and even spiritual. By facing your own shadow, you begin to interrupt the generational cycle. You stop projecting inherited fear. You reclaim your autonomy from unconscious forces that have been operating for centuries. In this way, the shadow is both an individual exile and a collective ghost. It lives in our families, our nations, our religions, and only when we are brave enough to confront it together can true healing begin. This is why Jung's work is so vital, especially in today's world, because the wars outside often begin with the wars inside. You may feel like your personal journey is yours alone, but in truth, every step you take toward wholeness echoes through the human story. When you confront your shame, you challenge the shame taught 2 generations. When you embrace your grief, you become a channel for ancestral healing. Your inner work ripples outward into your relationships, your communities, and the collective psyche of humanity. So now we stand at a powerful crossroad, the meeting point between your personal shadow and the ancient shadows of all humanity. And what lies at that meeting point? A mirror. In it, you do not just see yourself, you see the world, its pain, its contradictions, its beauty. And just as you begin to understand your own unconscious drives, you start to see the hidden motives that shape culture itself. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into this idea by exploring projection as psychological defense mechanism, through which we cast our own shadows onto others. This is one of the most revealing and life-changing aspects of Jung's work, and it might just change how you see everyone around you. Chapter 5. Projection and the mirror effect. One of the most unsettling truths Carl Jung ever revealed is this: what we reject in ourselves, we tend to see in others. This psychological process is called projection, and once you begin to understand it, you will never look at yourself or other people the same way again. Projection happens when we unconsciously assign our own unwanted traits, feelings, or impulses to someone else. Instead of saying, "I'm angry," we might say, "They're being aggressive." Instead of admitting, "I feel insecure," we might declare, "She's so arrogant." This is not lying, it's unconscious. The ego protects us from painful truths by shifting the responsibility outward. But in doing so, we stop seeing people for who they are. Instead, we see them as distorted reflections of what we haven't faced in ourselves. The shadow doesn't always stay hidden quietly in the unconscious. It wants to be seen. It demands to be acknowledged. And if we ignore it long enough, it finds another way to appear through projection. Your unresolved anger, jealousy, fear, shame, or desire doesn't disappear. It simply finds another face to wear. That coworker you can't stand. That stranger who bothers you for no logical reason. That celebrity who triggers something in you so intensely. Often, they are mirrors reflecting a part of you that you've disowned. This mirror effect is uncomfortable, but it is also one of the most profound tools for self-awareness. Every time you react strongly to someone, positively or negatively, yourself. What part of me is being reflected here? It might not always be obvious. You might project strength onto someone because you feel weak, or project arrogance onto someone because deep down, you wish you had the courage to speak up. Projection is never random, it reveals what's been buried. Jung believed projection was the main obstacle to personal growth and peace in human relationships. Why? Because as long as we keep projecting, we avoid ownership. We avoid healing. We keep blaming others for the very things we are afraid to admit about ourselves. And this can be devastating not just in romantic relationships, but in friendships, families, even nations. People fight wars, end marriages, and destroy communities over projections they don't even realize they're making. But there is another side to projection, one that Jung didn't ignore: the golden shadow. You see, we don't just project the dark. We also project the light, the talents we deny, the beauty we won't own, the genius, the confidence, the power, the joy. We project these onto others. To idols, heroes, influencers, people we obsess over or place on pedestals. When we say, "I could never be like them," what we often mean is, A part of me already is like them, but I've forgotten how to recognize it. This is called positive projection, and it's just as revealing as the negative kind. If someone deeply inspires you, don't just admire them, examine why. What quality are they showing you that already lives inside of you, quietly waiting to emerge? Projection, in both its light and dark forms, is the shadow's way of knocking on the door of consciousness. It's asking to be seen, not condemned. And when you recognize a projection for what it is, you reclaim your power. You take back what you gave away. You begin to see yourself clearly, and in turn, you begin to see others with more compassion. Imagine what kind of world we could live in if people stopped projecting their wounds and started healing them instead. A world where we take responsibility for our emotional reactions. A world where we listen before we judge. A world where every trigger becomes a teacher that begins with awareness. And awareness begins with the courage to ask, is this really about them, or is this about me? So the next time someone triggers you before reacting, pause. Not to blame yourself, but to be curious. What's being mirrored? What's the emotion beneath the emotion? And what might happen if you looked at that person, not as the enemy, but as a messenger? In the next chapter, we'll take this idea of mirrors even deeper. You'll see how the shadow shows up in our closest relationships, where love and pain often collide. In Chapter 6, The Shadow in Relationships, we explore how romantic connections, friendships, and even family ties often become the battleground for our unconscious selves. Chapter 6, The Shadow in Relationships. If you truly want to meet your shadow, you don't need to meditate in a cave or study ancient texts. You simply need to fall in love, or get close to someone, or allow someone to get close to you, because nothing brings the unconscious to the surface faster than intimacy. Relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, are mirrors, and not the clean, polished kind. They are warped, emotional, merciless mirrors that reflect our deepest fears, wounds, longings, and suppressed parts. We think we're loving someone else, but often, we're loving or hating pieces of ourselves reflected back at us. When you first meet someone and feel that magnetic pull, that overwhelming sense of connection, it often feels magical. Jung called this projection of the anima, or anima-san, unconscious transfer of our inner masculine or feminine archetype onto another person. You're not just falling for them, you're falling for what they represent within you, your lost passion, your suppressed wildness, your inner nurturer, your hidden vulnerability. They become a living symbol of something you've forgotten in yourself. But here's where it gets complicated. Once the initial enchantment wears off, something else often arises: conflict. We start seeing sides of them we didn't notice before. Annoyances, insecurities, behaviors that make our skin crawl. And just like that, the relationship becomes a battlefield of projection. The very qualities we once adored may now irritate or frighten us. Why? Because the mirror is still reflecting, but now it shows the shadow. You may say, she's so controlling, when deep down, you've never owned your own need for control. Or, he's so needy, when perhaps it's your own unmet emotional needs you can't acknowledge. We often fall in love with people who carry the disowned parts of ourselves. And the closer we get to them, the more those hidden pieces start to speak. This is why relationships are so often filled with triggers. Your partner says something small, and suddenly you're overwhelmed with rage or sadness. It's rarely about the comment itself, it's about what it activates in your shadow. Maybe a childhood wound, a memory you didn't know you remembered, a feeling you never processed. And now, your partner has become the stand-in for your parent, your past, your pain. But here's the opportunity. Relationships, when conscious, become sacred containers for shadow work. They give us the chance to notice our projections, to explore our wounds, to heal in real time. When you find yourself overly reactive, you can pause and ask, What part of me is being touched right now? What am I afraid of? What story am I telling myself? This doesn't mean staying in toxic dynamics or excusing harmful behavior. It means using conflict as a path to awareness, not just about the other person, but about yourself. Sometimes, the person who hurt you is not your enemy. They're your mirror. They showed you what you still carry, what you still haven't healed, what still lives in your shadow. And it's not just in romantic relationships. Friendships, too, can become shadow arenas. That friend you're secretly jealous of. Maybe they embody a part of you that you haven't owned yet. Your confidence, your creativity, your independence. That person you judge harshly. Perhaps they're expressing something you were taught to suppress. Even family relationships are rich with shadow. We inherit not only genetics, but generational wounds, traumas passed down silently through behavior and belief. Sometimes, the things we hate in our parents are the exact traits we fear in ourselves. The shadow doesn't just live in you, it lives in our bloodline. But here's where transformation begins. When you stop trying to fix others and start understanding yourself. The more you become aware of your own patterns, the less you project them. The more you integrate your shadow, the more space you create for true connection, not based on illusion, but on authenticity. Imagine being in a relationship where both people take ownership of their triggers, where blame becomes inquiry, where arguments become doorways, where love becomes not just romance, but reflection and growth. That kind of relationship is rare, but it's possible. And it starts with shadow work, not just within you, but between you. In the next chapter, we're going to widen the lens even further. We've talked about personal shadows, collective unconscious, and how the shadow appears in relationships. But now we ask, what happens when entire societies refuse to look at their shadow? Chapter 7. Society's Shadow and Culture. If individuals have shadows and, if those shadows influence how we think, feel, and act, then what happens when millions of people collectively suppress the same traits, truths, and wounds? The result is something Carl Jung called the collective shadow of society. It is the unconscious dark undercurrent that runs beneath nations, institutions, ideologies, and cultural norms. And just like the personal shadow, the collective shadow contains everything a society refuses to acknowledge about itself. You don't have to look far to find it. It hides in history books, rewritten by the victors. It lurks in political rhetoric that divides people by race, class, or religion. It pulses beneath mass entertainment, advertising, and nationalism. Wherever you find a public image that feels too perfect, too polished, too good to be true, you can bet there's a shadow nearby. Jung believed that cultures are just like individuals. They create personas, the masks of identity that say, this is who we are. A country might define itself as free, but silence its dissenters. A religious group might call itself moral, while ignoring abuse within its ranks. A society might celebrate peace while glorifying war in its media. Just like a person who pretends to be fine while crumbling inside. Cultures deny what they cannot bear to face. This denial becomes dangerous when it is embedded into law, language, and leadership. The collective shadow seeps into systems of power. It lives in inequality, in injustice, in the unspoken rules that shape who gets to thrive and who is left behind. And because it operates unconsciously, most people don't even know they're participating in it. Take racism, for example. It's not just a personal prejudice, it's a systemic shadow. Many societies built on colonialism or slavery have never truly confronted their past. Instead, they repress it. They create sanitized histories, myths of superiority, and institutions that preserve inequality. And when people begin to speak up, the collective shadow fights back through denial, defensiveness, and violence. Why? Because the shadow always resists the light. It doesn't want to be exposed, or consider the way modern culture treats mental health. For decades, Emotional vulnerability was dismissed as weakness. Depression was stigmatized. Anxiety was ridiculed. Society built a persona of productivity, strength, and success while burying the widespread suffering beneath silence. Only recently have we begun to peel back that mask? But there is still a long way to go. Even in entertainment, the collective shadow is at work. Films and music often reflect what a culture can't say directly. Horror movies externalize our repressed fears. Obsession with true crime reveals unspoken fascination with violence. Reality shows and celebrity gossip become projections of our own shadows, allowing us to judge, mock, and envy from a safe distance. But here's the important point. The collective shadow is not inherently evil. It's simply unconscious. And just like with individuals, the solution is not condemnation, it's integration. Societies must learn to face their history, to tell the truth about their wounds, to bring what was hidden into the light, not to destroy the old, but to build something wiser in its place. This is where art, activism, and spiritual leadership come in. They help bring awareness to what is hidden. They expose contradictions. They force uncomfortable conversations. They shine light into the shadow not to shame it, but to heal it. And you, as an individual, have a role to play in this collective awakening. Every time you examine your own biases, your inherited beliefs, your automatic reactions, you're weakening the grip of the collective shadow. Every time you speak truth in a room full of silence, you create space for transformation. Jung believed that the only way to prevent large-scale destruction like war, genocide, or social collapse was to bring the collective shadow into consciousness. He warned that what is not made conscious will be acted out in the world. When a society refuses to look within, it creates enemies outside. When it avoids its own darkness, it projects it onto others. And history is full of the consequences. But awareness is contagious. And hope lies in the courage of those willing to look inward. One person doing shadow work might not change the world overnight, but 1 million people doing it? That creates a cultural shift. In the next chapter, we turn from the macro back to the micro. You'll learn not just what the shadow is, but how to work with it, to integrate it, transform it, and reclaim its hidden power. Get ready for one of the most practical and transformational parts of Jung's theory. Chapter 8. Integrating the shadow self. You've seen the shadow. You've felt it move in your relationships, speak through your reactions, and echo through society. But now comes the most important part of Jung's shadow theory: integration. This is the process of reuniting with the parts of yourself that you once rejected of, becoming whole again. To integrate the shadow is not to eliminate it. It's not about becoming perfect or morally superior. It's about making peace with the full spectrum of who you are. Every part, the wounded, the wild, the ashamed, the furious, the sensual, the sensitive, the loud, the selfish, the insecure. Integration means recognizing these parts not as enemies but as exiled family waiting to come home. The first step is awareness. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see. Shadow work begins when you start noticing your emotional triggers, that flash of jealousy, that sudden anger, that quiet resentment. These reactions are not random. They are invitations. Each one points to a part of yourself that wants your attention. So instead of avoiding the feeling or blaming someone else for it, pause. Sit with it. Ask, where have I felt this before? What am I not allowing myself to feel or express? Journaling can be a powerful tool here. Writing down your reactions, thoughts, and dreams helps bring the unconscious into the conscious mind. Jung believed that dreams were the voice of the unconscious. In your dreams, the shadow often appears as characters, animals, or strange symbols. Pay attention to the people you fear or dislike in dreams. What qualities do they have? What might they represent in you? Another powerful practice is inner dialogue. Close your eyes. Picture the part of you you've rejected. Maybe it's your anger, Your sadness, your boldness. Give it a name. Let it speak. Ask it questions. Listen without judgment. You'll be surprised at what your shadow has to say. Often, it reveals unmet needs, childhood wounds, or truths you were never allowed to express. But integration isn't just internal. It shows up in behavior. It means making different choices. Speaking up when you'd usually stay silent. Saying no when your instinct is to people please. Expressing emotion without shame. Setting boundaries. Asking for help. Letting go of perfection. Each of these actions reclaims a piece of the self that was once lost. There's no single path to integration. It's a lifelong journey. Some days you'll feel like you've made progress. Other days, the shadow will come roaring back. That's okay. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about building a relationship with yourself. One rooted in compassion, honesty, and courage. Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming who you truly are. Not the mask, not the projection, but the authentic self, grounded in both light and shadow. Individuation is not a destination. It's a way of living. It means choosing truth over comfort, depth over ease, wholeness over approval. The paradox is this: the parts of you you're most afraid to face are often the ones holding your deepest gifts. Your anger might contain your power. Your fear might hide your intuition. Your jealousy might reveal your passion. Your sadness might unlock your capacity for love. The shadow doesn't just carry wounds, it carries wisdom. So how do you know? If you're integrating the shadow, you feel more honest, less reactive, more grounded in your decisions. You stop pretending. You stop chasing perfection. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. You see your flaws not as failures, but as part of the rich, messy, beautiful human experience. Shadow work isn't easy. It requires humility, patience, and above all, radical self-acceptance. But the reward is freedom, emotional freedom, psychological clarity, spiritual depth. You stop living a divided life and start living a real one. And perhaps, most importantly, when you integrate your shadow, you no longer need to project it onto others. You stop blaming, judging, or idolizing blindly. You see people clearly flawed and full, just like you. And in that seeing, compassion grows. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most mysterious and sacred phases of the shadow journey, the dark night of the soul. It's the moment when your shadow rises so fully, you feel lost, broken, or alone. But as Jung said, in all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Chapter 9, Dark Night of the Soul. There comes a point in every deep inner journey where the ground beneath you seems to vanish. Nothing makes sense anymore. The old comforts don't soothe you. The beliefs you once held tightly now feel like strangers. You feel hollow, directionless, and unbearably alone. This is not depression. This is not simply sadness. This is something older, deeper, sacred. Jung called it a psychological descent. Mystics call it the dark night of the soul. The dark night is not a detour, it is the path. It is the place where your shadow steps fully into the light and demands your attention. It is when the ego, the carefully constructed mask you've worn for years, begins to crack under pressure. The roles you played stop working. The achievements feel meaningless. The relationships lose their sparkle. And suddenly, you are face to face with the one person you've been avoiding all along, yourself. This chapter of your life may not come with warning. It might be triggered by loss, a breakup, a death, the collapse of a career, or the simple realization that the life you built no longer fits who you are. It can feel like falling into a black hole, one where even your faith, your dreams, and your identity seem to disappear. And yet Jung taught that this darkness is not punishment. It is purification. In the dark night, the shadow is no longer hidden in fragments. It swallows you whole. You begin to see your envy, your rage, your pride, your despair not in flashes, but in their full intensity. You realize how much of your life was lived in fear, how many choices were made from a desire to be accepted, how long you've abandoned your soul in favor of fitting in. This awareness is shattering and liberating, because within this disintegration lies the possibility of rebirth. The ego doesn't die to leave you empty, dies to make space for the self Jung's term, for the fully integrated, authentic being. The dark night strips away illusion. It tears down the stories you told yourself. And in doing so, it reveals a deeper truth, one you couldn't see while hiding behind masks. This is not a process you can rush, nor is it one you can fix. You must sit with it, grieve, question, break, surrender. It may last weeks, months, or years, but the transformation it offers is irreversible. You do not return from the dark night the same. You emerge quieter, clearer, stronger, not because you avoided pain, but because you danced with it. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The dark night is this exact process. You are not lost, you are being remade. The chaos has intelligence, the suffering has purpose, and when you come out the other side, you carry with you a depth, a wisdom, and a softness that cannot be learned any other way. Many people fear this chapter and avoid it at all costs. But those who walk through it emerge with something unshakably an inner anchor. They no longer look for validation in external things. They know who they are, not because someone told them, but because they met themselves in the fire and came out alive. And when you've been through your own dark night, you become safer to others and theirs. You no longer judge the broken. You no longer fear the wounded. You hold space for pain, because you know it doesn't destroy, it transforms. Chapter 10. The Shadow as a Source of Power. For most of your life, you were taught to fear the dark, to hide your flaws, to bury your rage, to silence your impulses. The shadow, you were told, is dangerous, something to be controlled or eliminated. But what if that darkness you've been avoiding wasn't a threat, but a source of power? Carl Jung didn't just see the shadow as a container of shame or trauma. He saw it as the repository of your raw life force, the energy you lost when you rejected parts of yourself. This is perhaps the greatest paradox of the human psyche. What you suppress doesn't just hurt you, it weakens you. And what you reclaim, what you integrate with love and awareness, becomes fuel for your transformation. Let's be clear, this isn't about glorifying negative behavior or making excuses for harm. This is about recognizing that beneath your anger is your ability to set boundaries. Beneath your envy is a roadmap to your deepest desires. Beneath your anxiety is a fierce awareness. Beneath your sadness is your sensitivity, your openness to life. Beneath your need for control may lie your brilliance, your visionary thinking. When we disown these parts, we become fragmented. We lose access to our full capacity. We walk through life, half alive, smiling, performing, surviving. But when we integrate these so-called dark traits, we begin to reclaim the intensity, depth, and drive they carry. You don't tame the shadow, you channel it. Artists, leaders, visionaries, healers, they all carry some form of shadow integration. They have tapped into the very parts of themselves that once felt dangerous. A poet who once silenced their pain now pours it into verse. An entrepreneur who once hid their ambition now builds an empire. A survivor who once carried shame now leads others into healing. The power wasn't created, was reclaimed. Your shadow contains the exact traits you were told to hide, often because others couldn't handle them. Your boldness, your sensuality, your wildness, your nonconformity, your voice. The parts of you that didn't fit into someone else's idea of good. But what if those are the parts that make you extraordinary? Think of it like electricity. When it's uncontrolled, it can be destructive. But when it's harnessed, when it's channeled with awareness and skill, it powers cities. That's the potential of the shadow. It doesn't disappear with healing, it becomes usable energy. It becomes creativity, confidence, charisma, clarity. It becomes the fire behind your purpose. Jung called this process alchemy, the transformation of the lead of the psyche into the gold of the soul. And it is nothing short of sacred. You don't just learn to manage your darkness, you learn to dance with it. You become intimate with your chaos. And in doing so, you unlock a depth of presence, passion, and authenticity that can't be faked. But this power only becomes available to those willing to do the inner work, to face what they fear, to befriend what they once exiled, to sit in discomfort long enough for the truth to emerge. The shadow does not give up its gifts easily, but it rewards those who earn its trust. This is not a one-time epiphany. It's a practice. Every day, you are offered choices. Will you suppress this feeling or explore it? Will you react blindly or reflect deeply? Will you avoid yourself or reclaim yourself? Power doesn't come from dominance. It comes from integration, from knowing yourself so deeply that nothing inside you scares you anymore. That's the kind of power that can't be taken away. The kind that doesn't seek to control others because it's rooted in self-mastery. And as you begin to walk this path, you'll notice something extraordinary. The world responds differently. You attract people who are also doing the work. You speak with more conviction. You create with more originality. You love with more depth. Why? Because you're no longer running from yourself. You're inhabiting yourself fully. Chapter 11. When the shadow takes over. There's a point in every person's life when the shadow isn't just suppressed, it starts to live through them. Carl Jung warned that if we do not make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. When ignored for too long, the shadow stops being passive. It begins to dominate. It drives behaviors, decisions, relationships, and self-worth, all without our awareness. This is when the shadow doesn't just exist in us, it starts to become us. We've all seen it, though we may not have had the words for it. The kind, soft-spoken person who suddenly explodes with rage. The loyal friend who unexpectedly betrays. The person who sabotages every relationship, job, or opportunity that comes their way. These are not random acts, they are the shadow in motion, acting out the emotions, needs, and truths we were too afraid to face. When the shadow takes over, it distorts reality. You begin to see the world through a lens of projection and pain. People who love you feel threatening. Good news feels suspicious. Success feels undeserved. The mind becomes a battleground where unacknowledged fears turn into stories. They're out to get me. I'll never be good enough. Everyone always leaves. And you begin to act in ways that confirm those stories, not realizing that you're the one writing them. This possession by the shadow can also manifest in addiction, narcissism, self-destruction, and cruelty. In extreme cases, Jung described how people lose their moral compass entirely when the shadow isn't just active, but completely identified with the ego. This is how atrocities happen, how seemingly normal people commit acts of unthinkable harm. When the shadow isn't integrated, it doesn't go away, becomes possessive. This is why shadow work isn't optional. It's not spiritual decoration. It's not just an interesting idea. It's necessary if we want to live clear, healthy, grounded lives. Because the longer the shadow remains unexamined, the more power it has to hijack your thoughts, sabotage your future, and damage the people you care about. What makes the shadow so dangerous when left alone is that it feeds off denial. The more you pretend everything is fine, the more it builds in intensity, until one day, something triggers it and the person you thought you were disappears in a flash of rage, despair, manipulation, or collapse. You say things you don't mean. You burn bridges you never wanted to, and afterward, you're left in shock. Why did I do that? The answer: the shadow was in control. But here's the critical truth. You are not your shadow. You are not your worst day. You are not your past. You are the awareness behind it. You are the one with the power to choose something different. But choice only comes with consciousness. This is why practices like journaling, meditation, therapy, and somatic work matter. They bring awareness. They help you track patterns, notice projections, and catch the shadow before it takes over. They help you create space between the feeling and the reaction so you can respond, not repeat. Relationships also reveal when the shadow is active. If you find yourself repeating toxic dynamics, attracting chaos, or pushing away love, you're not cursed. You're being shown what still lives in the dark. Don't run from it. Learn from it. Ask, what does this behavior protect me from? Feeling, what am I really afraid of? What story am I stuck in? The shadow is never trying to destroy you. It's trying to wake you up. And when you do wake up, when you begin to notice the shadow's voice and name it too, take your power back. The same force that once sabotaged your life now becomes fuel for healing, boundaries, creativity, and confidence. The same patterns that once haunted you become doorways to self-awareness. In the next chapter, we'll look at how the shadow journey isn't just personal, it's also spiritual. Carl Jung believe. Chapter 12. The Shadow and the Soul. Carl Jung was not just a psychologist, he was a mystic, a soul seeker. He didn't view the human psyche as a machine to be fixed, but as a sacred terrain to be explored. And nowhere was that more evident than in his belief that the shadow was not just a psychological mechanism, was a doorway to the soul. For Jung, the soul wasn't some abstract religious concept. It was the deepest part of who you are, the essence beneath the ego, the self that remembers why you're here, and the shadow. It was the guardian of that self. It protected the sacred by burying what the ego couldn't handle. But the longer we avoid the shadow, the more distant we grow from our soul. Jung believed that shadow work was a spiritual path because it involved death and rebirth. Each time you integrate a disowned part of yourself, something old dies, an identity, a belief, a fear, and something new is born in its place. This mirrors every ancient initiation, a descent into darkness, a confrontation with the unknown, and a return to the world transformed. The soul speaks in symbols, emotions, dreams. It doesn't care for logic or rules, it longs for truth. But truth is never tidy. It's messy, emotional, wild, and this is why we need the shadow. It carries the raw material of soul work. The parts of you that are angry, lustful, grieving, rebellious, passionate, these are not barriers to your spirituality. They are your spirituality, in raw form, waiting to be honored. In fact, many spiritual traditions unintentionally encourage shadow suppression. Think positive. Let it go. Just be grateful. While these ideas can be helpful, they often become spiritual, bypassing an attempt to avoid pain by masking it with light. Jung saw through this. He knew that true light comes from facing the dark, not avoiding it. And that's why shadow work is not just self-help. It's soul retrieval. Every time you sit with your fear, instead of running from it, your soul grows stronger. Every time you hold space for your shame without collapsing, your soul breathes deeper. Every time you say, "This is a part of me, too," your soul whispers, "Welcome home." And as you begin to live in alignment with your soul, not just your ego, you feel a shift. You stop chasing external validation. You stop measuring your worth in achievements or appearances. You begin to live from within. Your decisions feel clearer. Your relationships feel deeper. Life begins to feel sacred, even in its chaos. You realize that the pain you carried wasn't punishment, it was invitation. The wound wasn't weak, it was a portal. And the shadow wasn't your enemy, it was your teacher, your messenger, your guide. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. Not perfection, not enlightenment in the religious sense, but wholeness, a coming home to all that you are, light and dark, flawed and divine. And in that wholeness, you find the soul not as something separate from you, but as something you've always been. To walk the path of the soul is to walk with shadow in one hand and light in the other. It's not a straight path. It spirals, falls, lifts, and returns. But each time you say yes to the truth, yes to the dark, yes to the sacred mess that is being human, you step deeper into your own divinity. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to understand what it means to be truly free. In the next chapter, we'll step into the realm of everyday life. We've talked theory, soul, and symbols, but how do we live this? Chapter 13. Living with the Shadow Daily. Shadow work isn't a one-time event. It's not something you do after a breakup or during a retreat, only to forget about it once life gets better. No, shadow work is a daily practice, a conscious way of living. It's how you show up to your emotions, how you navigate your relationships, how you respond to discomfort. It's in the conversations you avoid, the reactions you justify, the truths you whisper only in the dark. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious never sleeps. The shadow doesn't clock in once a month. It moves with you through every moment. But that's not a burden, it's an invitation. When you learn to live with your shadow, you stop fearing the parts of yourself that are unpredictable, uncomfortable, or inconvenient. You stop reacting blindly. You start choosing wisely. So what does that look like in real life? It begins with awareness. You start noticing the micro moments. When you feel judged, do you get defensive? When someone else succeeds, do you feel joy or jealousy? When your partner gets emotional, do you shut down? These reactions are not wrong, they're data. They reveal the places where your shadow still lives. And when you meet those moments with curiosity instead of shame, you open the door to transformation. Journaling, just 5 minutes a day, can help illuminate these patterns. Ask yourself simple but powerful questions. What triggered me today? Why did it bother me? What part of me did I try to hide or deny? These aren't just mental exercises, they're acts of inner listening. They create space between the reaction and the response, between the unconscious and the conscious. Next comes radical honesty. Living with your shadow means being willing to tell yourself the truth even when it's uncomfortable. You admit when you're being manipulative. You acknowledge your pride. You own your envy. Not to punish yourself, but to liberate yourself. Because what you name, you can tame. And what you embrace, you can integrate. But living with the shadow isn't just an internal process. It's relational. It shows up in how you communicate, how you set boundaries, how you express needs. When someone triggers you, instead of lashing out or withdrawing, you can pause and say, I notice I'm feeling really reactive right now. Can we talk about what's coming up for me? That kind of language changes everything. It invites connection, not conflict, and it allows your shadow to be seen without being projected. Another key part of this daily practice is forgiveness, especially toward yourself. Shadow work will expose moments from your past where you acted from pain, fear, or ignorance. You may feel guilt or regret. But living with your shadow means recognizing that those parts of you were trying to survive. You don't excuse the behavior, but you bring compassion to the person you were. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing how you relate to it now. It also means staying grounded. You don't need to analyze every emotion or turn every conflict into a therapy session. Sometimes, living with the shadow just means breathing when your heart races. Choosing silence instead of sarcasm. Asking yourself what you're truly afraid of before making a decision. These small moments build trust with yourself. Over time, they become your new way of being, and then, perhaps most beautifully, you begin to offer others that same grace. When someone lashes out, you see their shadow, not just their aggression. When someone withdraws, you sense their fear, not just their silence. This doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means seeing humanity beneath the armor. and that changes how you relate to the world. Living with the shadow is not about being perfect, it's about being whole. It's not about having all the answers, it's about staying awake. Some days, you'll feel deeply integrated. Other days, your shadow will surprise you again. That's okay. This work isn't linear, it spirals, and every spiral brings you closer to yourself. The question is no longer, how do I get rid of my shadow? The question becomes, how can I walk with it today? Chapter 14. Meeting the Inner Critic. There's a voice inside your head that doesn't speak softly. It judges your every move. It tells you you're not doing enough, not good enough, not strong enough. It remembers every mistake. It downplays every success. It mocks your dreams and magnifies your flaws. You know this voice well, it's the inner critic, and though it may sound like truth, Carl Jung would tell you, it's the shadow in disguise. The inner critic is born from fragmentation. It develops early in life, often as a way to protect you. Maybe you were punished for being too loud, so the critic keeps you quiet. Maybe you were ridiculed for failing, so it pushes you to be perfect. Maybe you were ignored unless you performed, so it never lets you rest. In its own distorted way, the critic is trying to keep you safe from rejection, from humiliation, from loss. But over time, that protection becomes prison. The critic becomes a dominant voice, drowning out your intuition, creativity, and self-worth. And unlike external critics, you can't walk away from this one. It lives inside you, and it knows exactly where to strike. Jung understood that the inner critic isn't just negative self-talk, it's a part of the psyche that has been warped by unprocessed emotion. It's a shadow fragment that has taken control. But like all parts of the shadow, it isn't inherently evil, it's wounded. And once we recognize it as a fragment of the self, we can begin to work with it instead of being ruled by it. The first step is recognition. Begin to observe the voice. When does it show up? What does it say? Whose voice does it sound like? Often, the critic echoes the language of a parent, teacher, coach, or authority figure from childhood. It's not your soul talking, it's a learned voice, stuck in time. And the more aware you become of its patterns, the less control it has. Next is externalization. One powerful practice is to journal from the critic's perspective. Let it speak. Write out its judgments. Then respond to it not with anger, but with curiosity. Ask, what are you afraid will happen if I don't listen to you? What are you trying to protect me from? Often you'll find the critic isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to avoid pain. It believes that self-punishment will prevent external punishment. It believes that being hard on yourself will keep you ahead of judgment. But it's wrong. Because the truth is, when the inner critic runs your life, you never feel safe. You live in constant anxiety, constant performance, constant defense. You become your own captor, chained to expectations you never agreed to. That's why the next step is reparenting, offering yourself the kindness, validation, and encouragement that the critic never could. When the voice says, "You're lazy," you say, "I'm tired, and I'm allowed to rest." When it says, "You're not good enough," you say, "I'm learning, and that's enough for today." You replace judgment with empathy, not to deny your flaws, but to humanize them. Over time, something miraculous happens. The critic begins to soften. It becomes less hostile, more quiet. It may even transform into something wiser, a discernment voice, a protector with boundaries, a guide with compassion. That same voice that once tore you down begins to help you choose better, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. But this only happens when you stop fighting it and start listening to it with love. The inner critic is not a monster. It's a scared child wearing a mask. And like every part of your shadow, it just wants to be seen, heard, and integrated. Living with the inner critic doesn't mean silencing it forever. It means changing your relationship with it, making it part of your inner team, not the tyrant at the top. And when you do that, you begin to hear something else beneath the noise. your true voice, the voice of your deeper self, the one that whispers encouragement, not shame, possibility, not punishment. Chapter 15, Archetypes and the Shadow. Imagine that deep within your mind lives a cast of timeless characters. They speak through your dreams, they act out in your relationships, they shape your fears, your fantasies, and your fate. These aren't just psychological quirks. They are archetypes, universal patterns of behavior and energy that live in the collective unconscious. And according to Jung, the shadow doesn't exist on its own. It often wears the mask of these inner archetypes. At first, archetypes seem like mythology. The hero, the rebel, the caregiver, the lover, the sage. We see them in stories, films, religion, and folklore. But Jung believed they were far more than fiction. These figures are blueprints, shared psychological energies that live inside every human being, and when they are unconscious, they become powerful forces within the shadow self. Take the hero archetype, for example. At its best, it's courageous, noble, resilient. But when repressed or over-identified, the hero becomes arrogant, controlling, or obsessed with proving itself. A person may deny vulnerability, overwork themselves, or chase impossible goals driven, not by love, but by an unconscious need to defeat inner enemies. Or the rebel, the part of us that resists conformity, challenges injustice, and values freedom. When integrated, this archetype births innovation and truth-telling. But when trapped in shadow, it becomes reckless, destructive, or needlessly defiant. It burns bridges, not boundaries. It isolates instead of lives. Then there's the lover archetype. It longs for connection, beauty, intimacy. But when repressed, it hides behind emotional distance or sexual shame. When over-identified, it becomes needy, obsessive, or manipulative. The lover's shadow often shows up in our relationships, where unmet needs drive unconscious behaviors. These are just a few examples. Each archetype has a light side and a shadow side, and shadow work, at its deepest, means coming into conscious relationship with these inner forces. It means asking, which archetype is running this part of my life? Am I acting from love or from fear? Am I channeling the sage or am I possessed by the victim? Understanding archetypes is like learning the language of the soul. Suddenly, your dreams make more sense. Your patterns become visible. You see your behaviors not as random, but as part of a larger narrative. You begin to rewrite that narrative, not by rejecting these characters, but by integrating them with awareness and compassion. Jung believed that the path to wholeness required us to meet all of these inner figures, not just the pleasant ones. You must meet the shadow trickster, the part of you that lies, manipulates, or hides from the truth. You must face the wounded child, the tender place where old pain still lingers. You must confront the false king, the ego that clings to control and dominance. But here's the beauty. These shadow archetypes aren't here to shame you. They're here to wake you up, to teach you something vital about your psyche, your soul, your story. The trickster, for instance, isn't just creative. It teaches flexibility, humor, adaptation. The wounded child reminds you to care for your innocence. Even the Shadow King, when integrated, becomes the sovereign, the wise inner leader, who rules not through fear, but through alignment. Archetypes give the shadow shape. They allow you to see that the chaos within you has structure, history, and meaning. They help you externalize what feels overwhelming. And once you can name these energies, you can navigate them. You no longer act blindly. You interact consciously. You become a director of your inner cast, not a puppet of unconscious drives. This is why storytelling, mythology, and even fantasy can be so healing. They show us our inner world in symbols and metaphors. They remind us that we are not alone. Others have walked the same psychological terrain. That every great story is also a map of the soul. So as you continue your shadow work, Don't just ask, what am I hiding? Ask, which archetype is speaking through me right now? What does it want? What does it fear? What truth is it trying to protect or reveal? Chapter 16. Shadow projections in love and conflict. If you want to know what still lives in your shadow, look at your closest relationships. Look at your reactions, your triggers, your patterns of attraction and avoidance. Look at the people. You can't stand in the ones you idolize, because nothing reveals the unconscious more powerfully than love and conflict. Carl Jung called this phenomenon projection, when we see in others what we can't yet face in ourselves. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with parts of our own soul we see reflected in them. In the beginning, this is beautiful. A person seems to complete us, to awaken forgotten dreams or lost confidence. But often, we're not seeing the other person, we're seeing our ideal of them. We're seeing the light side of our own unlived potential. This is the shadow in disguise, dressed in gold. But what happens when that illusion fades? When the honeymoon ends? When the flaws show? When the disappointments surface? This is when the dark shadow emerges. Suddenly, the things you once adored become irritating. The person who made you feel safe now makes you feel threatened. Arguments repeat. Emotional walls rise. And if you're not conscious, you'll believe the problem is them. You'll think, if only they changed, I'd feel better. But shadow work teaches us something different. What you react to most intensely in others is often a reflection of something unresolved within yourself. If you're quick to label someone as needy, perhaps you've disowned your own need for closeness. If you judge someone for being angry, maybe you've never felt safe expressing your own anger. If you constantly attract emotionally unavailable partners, maybe you're unavailable in some way. Too guarded by fear, shame, or past pain. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is the foundation of shadow work in relationships. It doesn't mean tolerating abuse or staying in toxic dynamics. It means becoming radically responsible for your half of the emotional equation. And here's the hard truth. Most arguments aren't about the present. They're about unconscious wounds. You're not just fighting about dishes or texts or tone of voice. You're reliving moments from childhood. You're projecting your inner parent, inner critic, or inner child onto the person in front of you. That's why the feelings can be so intense, because the past is bleeding into the present. So, how do you break free? The first step is noticing the projection. When your reaction feels oversized for the situation, pause, ask, what is this really about? What am I protecting? What part of me feels unseen or unsafe right now? This creates space between the trigger and the truth. The second step is ownership. You stop blaming the other person for your emotional state. You express how you feel, not to shame, but to connect. You say, I notice I shut down when I feel criticized. That's something I'm working on. Or I realize I expect you to meet needs I've never expressed. That's not fair to you. This kind of honesty disarms conflict and invites healing. The third step is compassion. When you realize everyone is carrying their own shadow, you stop taking things so personally. You begin to see the wounded child behind the anger, the fear behind the distance. You hold space not just for your own healing but for theirs too. That doesn't mean you become a savior or a martyr. It means you become conscious. Relationships built on shadow projections eventually collapse. But relationships built on shadow integration evolve. They become mirrors for growth, containers for transformation. You stop trying to fix the other person and start exploring yourself. You stop reenacting old trauma and start creating new patterns. This is the essence of conscious love, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of awareness. Two people doing their work. Two people owning their shadows. Two people choosing truth over comfort, healing over blame. And when conflict arises, it always will. You don't fear it. You use it. You lean in. You ask, what are we really? fighting about, what is this moment trying to teach me about myself? That's the gift of shadow work in relationships. Not perfection, but profound self-awareness. Not controlled, but connection. Not fantasy, but intimacy built on the courage to be fully seen, shadow and all. Chapter 17. The Shadow and Creative Expression. There is a wild, untamed force within you, a pulse, a tension, a burning. It's not polite. It doesn't wait its turn. It doesn't care about being liked. It wants to be felt, heard, seen. That force is your creativity and, more often than not, it lives within your shadow. Carl Jung believed that the creative impulse wasn't separate from shadow work. It was shadow work in disguise. He wrote that the creative mind plays with the objects it loves. And often, those objects are our wounds, our fears, our forbidden desires. This is why the most powerful art doesn't come from sanitized positivity, comes from the depths. It comes from the places we hide from the world, and sometimes from ourselves. Think of your favorite music, films, books, or paintings. They rarely paint a picture of perfection. They speak of heartbreak, longing, madness, rage, hope, and redemption. Why? Because true creativity is not about impressing others. It's about expressing the truth. And truth always contains light and dark. The shadow holds enormous creative energy because it's where we've locked away our most powerful emotions. The rage you suppressed in childhood, it becomes poetry. The loneliness you carried in silence, it becomes a song. The grief you buried behind a smile, it becomes a canvas of color and chaos. The sensuality you denied, it becomes rhythm, story, film. The shadow is not sterile, it is rich soil, waiting for seeds of expression. When we avoid the shadow, we often experience creative blocks. We say we're uninspired, stuck, unmotivated. But often, what we're actually doing is resisting the emotional truth that wants to come through us. We're afraid of being judged, afraid of what we might reveal, afraid that the rawness we carry is too much. So we censor ourselves. We edit before we speak. We plan before we feel, and the fire dies. But when we allow the shadow to speak not just through words, but through art, something incredible happens. We stop performing, and we start creating. We stop chasing perfection, and we start telling the truth. And that truth, no matter how messy or strange, resonates. Because humans don't connect through polish, we connect through authenticity. Jung encouraged the use of active imagination, writing, or moving, as a way to interact with shadow aspects of the self. He believed the unconscious had its own language, symbol. You might draw a monster that has no name. You might write a dialogue with your fear. You might dance a story your mouth could never speak. These acts are not childish, they are sacred rituals. They're how the soul speaks when words fall short. And here's the most important thing. Your creativity doesn't have to be public. It doesn't need to be shared, sold, or liked. You can create in the dark. You can sing into a pillow, sketch in silence, journal and burn the pages. What matters is not what the world sees. What matters is that you see it, and that you no longer hide from it. That's the paradox of shadow expression. The more personal it is, the more universal it becomes. When you create from your shadow, you say, this is what it feels like to be me. And somewhere, someone hears or sees it, and says, I thought I was the only one. In that moment, connection happens, healing happens, humanity happens. Shadow creativity is not about control. It's about surrender. It's not about aesthetics. It's about honesty. And it doesn't always look beautiful. Sometimes it's chaotic, raw, unsettling. But that's the point. Creation is not about being nice. It's about being free. And in that freedom, something astonishing happens. Your pain becomes power. Your shame becomes voice. Your wounds become medicine. Not just for you, but for anyone who experiences your work. So the next time you feel blocked, ask not what you want to say. Ask what you've been afraid to feel, what you've been told to hide, what part of your story still lives in the shadows. Then give it a pen, a brush, a keyboard, a beat, and watch what happens when you let the shadow create with you, not against you. Chapter 18. The Collective Shadow and Society. When we think of the shadow, we often picture something private, a personal fear, a hidden trauma, a secret longing. But Carl Jung reminded us that the shadow doesn't live only in individuals. It also lives in cultures, religions, governments, and generations. It shows up not just in people, but in movements, ideologies, and institutions. This is the collective shadow, and it is just as dangerous and just as important to confront as the personal one. Every society has traits, it celebrates values, it puts on display. These form its collective persona: progress, freedom, peace, order, strength. But just like with individuals, whatever doesn't fit this image gets pushed underground. The history that's too painful to teach, the voices that were silenced, the cruelty masked by tradition. These unacknowledged truths form the collective shadow, a psychic underworld that, when ignored, turns into division, conflict, and collapse. We see the collective shadow when nations glorify war while ignoring the trauma it causes. When racism, sexism, or classism are denied rather than addressed. When entire populations are othered, feared, or erased in the name of nationalism or religion. When injustice is systematized and those who question it are shamed or punished. These are not political issues, they are signs of a shadow that has never been faced. Jung warned that when the collective shadow is not acknowledged, it eventually erupts through social unrest, revolutions, scapegoating, or even genocide. History shows us this pattern again and again. What is repressed becomes volatile. What is denied returns with a vengeance. This is why collective healing is not just about better laws, it's about better consciousness. So what does it mean to confront the collective shadow? It means we must stop pretending that the darkness out there has nothing to do with us. It means we look at how our comfort may depend on someone else's suffering. It means we examine our own biases, privileges, and inherited beliefs, with guilt, but with responsibility. It also means listening to those we've ignored, the marginalized, the oppressed, the truth-tellers who have been dismissed. Their stories are not inconvenient, they are essential, because within their pain lies the wisdom society needs to evolve. The collective shadow also shows up in group psychology in mobs, cults, and echo chambers. Jung observed that individuals in groups often regress, becoming more primitive, reactive, and suggestible. Why? Because groupthink makes it easy to project the shadow onto a shared enemy. We blame them for everything we don't want to face in ourselves. And in that act, we feel falsely cleansed but become dangerously unconscious. This is why true change doesn't start with political slogans or performative outrage. It starts with inner work, with people willing to feel discomfort, willing to hold paradox, willing to say, I don't know everything, but I want to understand. Collective shadow work begins when enough individuals take responsibility for their own unconscious material and refuse to pass it on. Art, education, storytelling, these are powerful tools for collective shadow integration. When we make space for the full truth of our history, we begin to heal it. When we amplify voices long silenced, we create balance. When we teach children emotional literacy and critical thinking, we build a future less driven by fear. But this requires courage, because the collective shadow doesn't go down without a fight. It resists, denies, distracts. It wears the mask of tradition, of superiority, of certainty. And yet, the moment we begin to name it, to hold it in the light, with humility and hope, we weaken its grip. Jung believed that humanity's future depended on this work, that no amount of technology or progress could save us unless we learned to confront the darkness within our shared psyche. And that starts with you, with me, with all of us choosing to see clearly, speak honestly, and act consciously. Chapter 19. How to begin your shadow work. You've made it this far. That alone says something important. You're ready. Shadow work can seem complex, even intimidating. But Carl Jung didn't design it as a lofty theory only for scholars. He intended it as a living practice, something that anyone unaware can engage with. The shadow isn't an enemy to defeat. It's a part of you asking to be seen, and the journey begins with something beautifully simple: awareness. The first step in shadow work is learning to observe without judgment. This means noticing your emotional triggers, automatic reactions, and recurring life patterns, not to analyze them at first, but simply to witness them. When something stings, pause. When you feel jealousy, anger, shame, or resentment, don't suppress it. Ask gently, where is this coming from? What might this be revealing? That question alone is powerful. It turns unconscious material into conscious information. You can start this process with a shadow journal. Each night, take 5 to 10 minutes and write down the moments during your day that made you uncomfortable. Not just external events, but your inner reactions. Did someone's success make you irritated? Did a compliment make you feel fake? Did criticism wreck your confidence? These are dummies. Every uncomfortable emotion is a flashlight pointing toward a hidden belief or wound. Don't try to fix everything at once. Begin with curiosity, not urgency. Shadow work isn't about hacking yourself or erasing flaws. It's about reclaiming parts of yourself that you've disowned. When a strong emotion arises, sit with it, feel it, ask what it needs. Often, that anger is really a boundary that was crossed. That sadness is a part of you needing care. That fear is trying to keep you safe, even if its method is outdated. The next step is self-inquiry. Ask yourself deep, honest questions, like what parts of myself do I hide from others? What emotions do I judge or suppress the most? Who triggers me and why? When have I felt most ashamed? What do I project onto others? These questions will bring discomfort. That's natural. Shadow work isn't supposed to feel easy, it's supposed to feel real. But the goal isn't to drown in the past. It's to bring the truth into the light, where it can be felt, healed, and transformed. Another vital practice is inner child work. Much of your shadow was formed in childhood, when you were too young to understand or defend yourself. The feelings you weren't allowed to have, sadness, anger, neediness, were buried. As an adult, they show up as overreactions, self-sabotage, or emotional numbness. Reconnecting with your inner child through visualization, gentle dialogue, or writing letters to your younger self can unlock enormous healing. And you don't have to do this alone. Therapy can be a powerful ally in shadow work, especially Jungian or psychodynamic therapy. If that's not accessible, find books, podcasts, or trusted people who support your journey. Healing happens in safe spaces, and sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is ask for support. Also, don't underestimate the power of the body. Shadow work isn't just mental, it's emotional and physical. Trauma, repression, and unspoken emotion live in your nervous system. Practices like breathwork, movement, somatic experiencing, and mindful walking can help release what words alone cannot. And remember this, you don't need to solve the shadow. You just need to build a relationship with it. Think of it like making friends with a wild animal. You don't chase it to sit still. You listen, you earn trust. Over time, what once frightened you becomes familiar. You gain power, not through domination, but through compassion. The key is consistency. Shadow work doesn't require hours a day. It requires presence, a willingness to feel, a commitment to tell the truth. Bit by bit, you'll notice changes. You'll react less and respond more. You'll understand yourself in ways that dissolve shame. You'll begin to love not just your light, but your depth, your edge, your humanity. Shadow work is not a linear path. Some days you'll feel clarity, others, confusion. That's okay. Healing moves in spirals. What matters is that you keep showing up. Keep choosing awareness over avoidance. Honesty over comfort. Wholeness over performance. In the next chapter, we'll prepare for the final stretch. After the long journey through darkness, what waits on the other side? Chapter 20. The Gift of Wholeness. Carl Jung never promised us happiness. What he promised was something far more valuable: wholeness. To Jung, the goal of life was not to become perfect, enlightened, or forever healed, was to become whole. And wholeness doesn't mean light without darkness. It means embracing the totality of who you are, the sacred and the shameful, the conscious and the hidden, the angel and the animal. This is the gift of shadow work. It brings you home not to the person you were told to be, but to the person you already are, beneath the masks, the roles, the edits. When you stop fighting your shadow, something softens. You stop trying to earn love and start recognizing that you are love. You stop chasing peace and start building it inside yourself. Wholeness means you can feel grief without being broken by it. You can feel anger without becoming destructive. You can recognize jealousy, fear, insecurity and still choose love, integrity, and wisdom. You are no longer controlled by what is unconscious. You are no longer afraid of your own mind. And this is what real freedom looks like, not the absence of pain, but the presence of inner alignment. Wholeness is also the foundation of authenticity. You don't need to pretend anymore. You can walk into the world as your full self, complex, human. Your flaws become your texture. Your scars become your story. You no longer need to shrink to be accepted or inflate to be respected. You are enough, as is. This integration has a ripple effect. Your relationships change. You become more honest, less reactive, more forgiving. You stop trying to change people and start meeting them where they are. You become a mirror, not a mask, someone who reflects truth instead of projection. Your work changes. You stop striving to prove your worth and start creating from truth. Whether you're an artist, parent, leader, teacher, or healer, you bring your whole self to the table. You speak not just from the head, but from the heart and soul. People feel that. They trust that, because it's rare. Even your view of life shifts. You no longer see pain as punishment, but as portal. You understand that every breakdown brought you closer to breakthrough, that the shadow didn't block your path, it was the path. Every dark night of the soul carved space for the light. Every fear you faced built strength you couldn't fake. And the beautiful irony: when you stop striving to be perfect, you become more powerful. Because power doesn't come from control, it comes from integration. You own your story. You know who you are. You have nothing to hide and nothing to prove. That is presence. That is wholeness. That is peace. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are is not a fragmented being, light over here, shadow over there. You are a unified field of emotion, thought, instinct, spirit, and experience. You are both ocean and fire, stillness and storm. And the moment you stop running from that truth is the moment you come alive." This doesn't mean the work is over. Shadow integration is not a destination. It's a lifelong relationship. New triggers will emerge. New layers will unfold. But now, you'll have the tools. You'll have the trust. And you'll know that darkness isn't a dead end. It's a doorway. So as we close this journey, take a deep breath. You have traveled far, not across mountains or maps, but within yourself. And in doing so, you've touched something sacred, the soul that was waiting to be reclaimed. The parts of you that were never lost, just waiting for the light of your awareness. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are not behind. You are unfolding. You are not too much. You are magnificently human. Let this be your truth. You are allowed to carry both your shadow and your light. You are allowed to walk the world whole. And with that, welcome home.